I'm going to just tell you a little bit about this thing. I started it almost 3 years ago, and I started trying to figure out who are we today as a people, as Americans, and what are we thinking? And for me personally, I didn't recognize my country, and maybe I've had my head buried in my silo all these years. And I think that perhaps, like a
Hmm.
lot of people, we all get busy, and we're really not looking up and paying much attention other than what's right in front of us, and which is a common problem. And that's feeded by technology today and everything that's fed to us. And so I started going around the country, having conversations with just strangers. I would just go someplace and I start walking around with my video camera and talk to people.
Hmm.
And a diverse group. I have people of all colors. I've got people of all ages. I've got people that are conservative. I've got people that are liberal. And I don't talk politics. I really just want to know what people are thinking, what's going on in your
Yeah.
life today. And I found some interesting things. And I just go, a lot of people have said, well, what have you found? And well, people have different views about things. The one thing I found is almost everybody thinks that we're too divisive today. We're too divided.
Yeah.
And the fact that we really share an awful lot of commonality, we do really have a lot of common ground. We just don't choose to necessarily spend a lot of time there, and for whatever reasons. So that's the big picture of the project. Probably prior to the last big election, a lot of people sort of realized that there was a lot of stuff lying under the surface that we haven't talked about.
Yeah.
And we really need to have a dialogue. We need to start talking now. So Jake was telling me that you've been in some of these rallies and some of these demonstrations, and you've been out there on the street and a little bit, and I'm really interested in certainly that, and that's kind of what Jake was telling me that you were going to have a conversation about.
Well, I'm just to be clear, I'm not sure if you've been on the street at all, but I just have really myself seen you very active on media. It seems like you've been doing actual research. So I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm curious to see, I guess, John, maybe it'd be good to start with that conversation we always tell people. It's like maybe do you want to give us a little bit just so people at home maybe know a bit of your background, like just a little highlight of like how you are where you are now in Seattle. How do you think we got here to where we are currently? Do you want to give a little contextual like
Yeah,
explanation of what's going on also as just context of this particular moment?
yeah,
Okay.
that would be good. And I'm just going to add one thing. It's a little, as Jake mentioned, it's really good to have a little bit of why are you in Seattle, and a little background, and it's always good to know something about the person. And how you kind of got to where you are right now.
Well, I'm actually in Tacoma. I was born in Alaska, but my family moved down here in around 2003 because the housing market was pretty cheap. Um, since I've been in Tacoma, I've gotten to be in about two different school within a school programs. So in middle school, I had a class of about 80 kids, and they had three grades in there, so from sixth to eighth graders, all in one room with four teachers. And it was centered on team building and on building our communication skills and getting us more comfortable with speaking publicly. And then from there, I went to high school and joined the Lincoln Center. And that was also a school within a school that was focused on college preparedness and on getting the students to understand that the society that we're graduating into doesn't necessarily value us for our work. And so it was centered on making sure that we didn't lower the value in ourselves as well. And after that, I went to college in Seattle. Um, my degree in history, political science, and communications, and moved back to Tacoma, started working in the state. I was with the Employment Security Department for about 8 months, not very long. Didn't enjoy it there at all. And then went to DSHS and got tired of telling people I couldn't help them. So right before COVID started, I left that job and went into photography. I was in elementary schools with children, and then the elementary schools closed. And so now I'm here. I'd say the way we got to this point from a historical viewpoint would be that our country was set up this way from the start. This was this was always going to happen as long as we had a two-tiered society. And what I mean by that was that our founding fathers didn't necessarily write slavery into the Constitution. However, the people who were involved in writing the Constitution did own slaves and did want to make sure that that institution was protected. And so we got things like the House of Representatives, which counted members based off of population in those states. But the southern states needed to count their slaves in order to make sure they had enough representation to counter the northern states. So they counted slaves, about 60% of them. And from there, just looking through history, there are little tidbits like that everywhere that continue this system of oppression, that relegate minorities, people of color, particularly Black people, but overall Latinos as well, Native Americans, I would say some people from East Asia, essentially to a lower position in which our communities don't have resources. Like we don't have like community gardens. We don't have a lot of mental health institutions here. It's a lot of liquor stores and faulty infrastructure. The schools don't get enough funding. And so the situation is that we have people born into these communities who aren't given the same opportunity and access to education or things that will really help develop them. And then we put them out into a capitalist market, telling them to compete with people who grew up getting private tutoring and getting private lessons, traveling the world. And there's more value in that for employers. And so it's really relegated us to continuing the cycle of poverty. We've had enough.
Yeah, that's interesting. You're spot on. We do have a history, and I think a lot of people were mistakenly had thought that we had made progress.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say maybe we thought that during the '60s and towards the end of the '60s that maybe there had been some progress. And I would be one of those because, okay, I mean, I'm old enough to go back to understand the '60s,
Yeah.
and in fact, we really haven't. It maybe looked that way and kind of acted that way, and but we don't. I had a conversation with one of the people on this project. And if someone had said to me that basically, racism is not dead. And the idea that we just had a one Black president was not
Mm-hmm.
going to change anything. We have so much to do, and everything has been uncovered now. And I think the other thing is, if there's anything that's good about maybe this culture of divisiveness has been promoted so much, as a lot of people have become aware of things that they were not previously, and aware in a positive way. More people are aware of the fact that voting is important.
Mm-hmm.
We're more aware of the fact that we're learning maybe to pay attention to our country and the Constitution and a lot of other things. And now we're paying an awful lot of attention at this given moment right now to racism and the Black community. So, and I've spoken with, Latino, Hispanic people. Their story is, not dissimilar, different background and how something started, but at the same time, I mean, how, the treatment and so there's so much going on right now. I'm really interested in what you think about this moment and what you think about what can happen. What can we get change? You think Is this going to change something, do you think?
Um, I'm optimistic that there will be change, but similarly with the 60s, and the reason why I think the racism flew under the radar was that they simply just changed the way that racism was operating in the country after the 60s. Like they passed the civil rights laws, and so people could no longer be lynched out in the roads, and they couldn't have their votes denied, overtly, unless you're a criminal. And so from there, the attention sort of shift from attacking people on the streets to getting them within the prison system and attacking them there and exploiting them for labor. And so I worry that in this moment where we're all focused on the police brutality aspect of it, I do worry that there will be shifts that we think are taking care of the problem, but are really just redirecting the agony somewhere else. And it seems that the way it works in this country, the way our politics and media run, and are run by our wealthy almost exclusively, at least our widespread media and our widespread politicians are more wealthy and almost exclusive to that class. Um, I do worry there's not enough representation for people on the bottom, and so in the moment, I'm hesitant to be hopeful that they're not shifting resource around again to give us a moral win, like having a black president without really addressing the issues at the core here.
Yeah. You mentioned something that makes me think there was a conversation I had with a fellow in Detroit in September. And very, very sharp. He was 24, 25. And he said to me that he didn't think that we have a racism problem. He thinks that we have a classism problem. And he thinks that classism is a really, really big problem that we have in this country.
Yeah.
He also, and this was obviously before COVID, and this is before what the events right now in front of us. But it was, he said that what he found, and he went to Detroit, he was there for 8 years, moved as a young man. His family moved, and it was from Lansing. And he said to me, it was going from one black kind of environment to a different black environment. And he said it was a culture shock. Okay. And he's a black man going to a different kind of black environment in Detroit.
Yeah.
Is totally black. Okay. and then he said, in Lansing, it was more kind of a mixed, and there was more sort of that kind of mixed politeness or whatever that might be, or those normal things that you would find. Well, that's their community there, and this is ours over here. But he was just kind of thrown into kind of a totally black environment there, and it was very interesting. He found it interesting, but he also was very optimistic about the opportunities there, and that's what he was doing, is trying to, an entrepreneur working on some projects to help rebuild communities in Detroit, which seriously needs some rebuilding. And I can imagine now, after COVID and what's going on now, that this has probably set much of that back. But I thought the classism thing was interesting to me.
Yeah, I would agree with them largely. I do think that I think that economics are the arena in which racism gets to really fully flourish, and that essentially we're using our economic system to relegate people of color specifically to a lower status by typically employing them in fields that just value their manual labor or view them as human stock capital, but not in the fields that really allow them to thrive on their own, like in the fields of like being a doctor or being politicians, lawyers, CEOs. Those aren't really filled with people of color. Typically the positions on bottom, the people doing the grunt work are.
Yeah.
And like I was saying before, not having the money and being able to then spread the education to people, or or invest in your own community is helping perpetuate that cycle as well.
Yeah. There's another, I've talked to a black man in Stockton, California, and he came out of Compton and East San Jose, and got out of the hood. And I asked him, I said, well, how did you break out of that cycle? Because he was talking about his background as a kid.
Mm-hmm.
And he said that it was very difficult to get out of that. And what he's doing now, and he said he had a mentor, and it was interesting. And I've told a couple of people this story, and if you don't understand, they're kind of shocked. And I tell them about the mentor, and they say, "Oh, that's really nice. You know, he's a little kid, you know, and the mentor, you know, you'd buy him a soda and shoot a hoop with him." And then he said, "Well, he was a drug dealer." But then he said, "Well, that's life. I mean, that's what you know. That's what happens in these communities. That's how people.
Yeah.
It's what they do." But he said, you know, he was kind of like my father figure, and he showed him some love and showed him some stuff that. And then he had one other event where he said he was with his cousin, and yeah, they were doing some bad shit, and you know, I don't know, they stole something, right? You know, it's kind of what kids do. Anyway, they were running, and his cousin got shot in the back. Police. And then he said, in California, anyway, told me, he said, well, he said, I would be responsible or convicted for the shooting because, the accomplice becomes the shooter. And he said what saved him at the time was all the stuff that was going on with Rodney King.
Mm-hmm.
And there was so much going on that they didn't want anything. So he kind of got off. He got off with basically a hand slap, and he was fortunate. And I think there was a reality check for him, and that sort of set him on a new path. And what he's been doing for the last 20-some years is helping youth. And that's what he does, to get out of the hood, or when they get out of prison, to help them get back into society. He also told me, I didn't know anything about this, the prison or the school to prison pipeline.
Yep.
I didn't know. He said, Google it. He said, if you don't believe me, just Google it. And he said, my 7-year-old, 8-year-old son, the school's got a file on him. You know, and I went there and I said, why aren't you talking to me? And so they build the file. And the file is just so they can fill the prisons.
Mm-hmm.
As you said, it's the labor force.
Yeah, it's.
Anyway, so that's a reality. A lot of people don't know or don't understand that. They don't understand the difficulty. It's just not that easy. And a lot of people think that is.
I get that. That I would advise looking at the media that Black culture is producing. It should give you some insights into what kind of environment they're growing up in. Like, for instance, the movie 13th on Netflix right now, directed by Ava DuVernay, covers specifically the prison system. And her core argument is that slavery never ended. It just got shifted over to the prison population. And it just feels like, looking at a lot of Black media, these arguments have been there for decades. It's just the audience doesn't extend beyond the Black community, unfortunately.
Yeah. How does that change? How do we change that?
That's a difficult question, unfortunately.
You know what?
I don't feel like that's just exclusive to the Black community. So
No.
I also feel like we're not watching movies from the from the Latinx community or from the Native American community. Like,
No.
it's probably not spread to have seen Stand By Me with Mr. Escalante, or Smoke Signals with Victor.
Yeah. Yes. I know I had in Arizona and Phoenix a conversation with a young Hispanic fellow, And he was telling me about his parents. One of them has become a citizen. He's a citizen because he was born in the country.
Hmm.
And his problem is, he says, everybody thinks, well, why don't you become a citizen? Why don't? And he said, it takes over 10 years
Hmm.
and lots of paperwork. It's very, very, very difficult. But somebody, a white person says, well, why don't you just become a citizen? Like that's an easy thing to do. There's so many hurdles, and in 10 years. And he said, it's unbelievable
Yeah.
how difficult.
Yeah, there's a problem with advising people to take steps that we're not informed about ourselves. If we're going to encourage people to pursue, I can't talk right now, pursue certain avenues, then we should at least understand what those avenues are. The immigration system is long and convoluted and expensive.
Yes. Well, this is one of the things. There's so many things to talk about in all of this. It does seem to me that a couple of things, it goes back to the classism thing about, okay, we have people of a different class or different uh, strata or whatever
Mm-hmm.
that are making some decisions or making decisions about immigration when they are not sitting with a table of people who are immigrants that could actually add to the conversation and add to the rules. You know,
Yeah.
anyway,
I think that's specifically because the goal of these conversations and the goal of these institutions isn't necessarily to improve the standard of living for the people. Oftentimes, it feels like the main goal is to find profit somewhere. Like, what's the point of our prison system? Like, do we have prisons to rehabilitate the population, or are we taking people that we deem as criminal or that don't fit within the parameters of what we deem acceptable, and we put them in there and make them do labor? It it really seems that we need to address the reason for why we have these institutions in the first place, to then address the problems that are stemming from them.
yeah. It's interesting. For me personally, a very long time ago, I was working on a project, in a work project business. And my business has always been design, communication, anyway. During this, I became aware of the private prison business.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, oh, that's interesting. Now, this was quite some time ago. And I kind of learned a little bit about that. And I thought, oh, that was because being naive or not knowing about the subject, I always thought, well, prisons were run, by the government, state, somehow or another. It was sort of a federal system or whatever. And I never realized that it was a private industry.
Yep.
And that, of course, makes sense. And it's an industry that's grown a great deal. And there's a tremendous amount of money in it and made. I mean, it's like being in the hotel business, except that you've got guaranteed customers,
Yeah.
and you don't have to have so many amenities.
Nope.
And actually, the room rate is higher than if you were staying at a four-star hotel. So it makes perfect sense, and it goes back to this thing again. It's kind of follow the money on a lot of this stuff.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what's the solution? I have no idea. But maybe talking and that people do understand and get behind something a little bit and get the information like, oh, that's why this is happening.
Yeah.
And then what can we do? What can we say? What can we do about it?
I agree completely with that. We The reason why a lot of these problems were able to last for so long is because a lot of us don't know about them. And that's definitely the first step to addressing the problem, making sure we're aware that it exists. I'm not sure how we'll tackle it once we do have that awareness problem solved, though.
Well,
But
that would be a good first step, though.
yeah, that's what we need.
Yeah, I guess I was going to ask a question regarding like again like the current events. Like I'm seeing these live streams down in Seattle. My friend actually conveniently lives right above the East Precinct where they're having the riots and stuff. And I'm just curious, like, first of all, are you shocked at this reaction and how many riots that are going on? And also, like, could you tell us a little bit about what you hope to see as a reaction of long term of like right now we're just seeing riots, but like long term, what is the game plan, or what do you hope to see change in like a police reform or anything?
No, I'm not surprised by this. This seems to happen pretty frequently, where there will be a killing in a community of color by a police officer, to which the people respond to with protests, and the police officers go to the protest, sparking violence, and so this is the natural outcome. Um, Personally, what I want us to get out of this is legislation. We need we need to fix these laws. We need to address things like qualified immunity that gives police officers immunity of some of the crimes they're committing. There are things written into the laws that are allowing these injustices to transpire, and we need to address those. We can't just change the people, or throw fluffy language at things. We need to go through and put in legislation that addresses the problems and alters these institutions. We need to defund the police largely. There's no reason for them to be walking around the streets in military gear. We don't need that here. We're not a police state, or at least we shouldn't be a police state. Personally, um, I haven't gone walking just yet. I've just been donating money to like the Minnesota Freedom Front and Seattle Black Lives Matter. I was headed down to the Tacoma one. It's pretty small, and kind of like walked in the nearby area, but didn't join like the full on group. I'm really nervous about COVID, and I've already got breathing issues. Um, but aside from legislation, unity would be priority here. It seems like as these protests go along, the message gets slightly lost. There's been so much debate on the looting, the rioting, or on the police's independent actions, where I feel like the focus should essentially be on the core question here, and that's, do people in this country deserve to have these rights to each other? Do they deserve to be treated similarly by the institutions here? Do they deserve to have access to an adequate amount of resources? And I think the answer to all those questions are yes. Regardless of what happens with these protests, those answers are yes. And we need to make adjustments on that. We need to invest in these communities.
John, do you have anything
Yeah.
else?
I think that we have a problem, I think, with media. And, media is part of the problem, and media I think gets manipulated by, again, it's money. And it's the people in power or the people in charge. But it's also kind of what plays to an audience. An audience always likes to see the bad stuff. They never want to see the good stuff. And I just looked at something earlier this morning. Somebody put up something on a Facebook feed. And it was a little collection of 13, 14 photographs, stuff that people had put up. And it was all the good stuff. It was the police that were taking a knee someplace. It was the police that were, no, it was the civilians, the protesters that were protecting a cop that kind of got set aside, there was it was basically people being people. It was humanity. It was human. It was like the right to speak, the right to have a voice, the right to protest, the right to be there. And it was also the fact that the police are going to be there for control, whatever, but it wasn't the conflict part. We always see that. And it was kind of refreshing to see that not every person in a demonstration is a bad person. Not every policeman is a bad person. And we need to see that, and then we can have discussions and conversation, but we only see the bad stuff. And that just incites. And I'm not defending. Believe me, I'm not defending anybody who's doing anything bad at all. But I'm just saying that was kind of a refreshing thing to see that. And so, why don't we see that as a balance? Why don't we see the brutality? And then why don't we see that there are good people? So we can find a place where we can sit down and talk about things rather than just conflict. I don't know. It's
No, I hear you. I
yeah.
I do worry though that with some of the material coming out of these protests that are favorable to, the police or that show unity between the two groups may dilute the message here a bit. But it's not necessarily, because I do hear that there's an argument that all cops are bad. Um, and I don't know how central that is to the movement right now. But I do think it's important to still remember that even if the people are good themselves, they're still gassing people. And a lot of them are still using their batons on peaceful protesters while other police officers aren't reporting them. And so even if the individual is good within the system overall seems to be perpetrating violence. And like there are some cops I have seen during these protests who will stop in the middle of pushing the groups back to address one particular cop's action. And those ones I think are heroes. But I think we can't get lost in the individuals. We should stay focused largely on the systems at large, because again, they may be nice people, but we watch them on the news gas peaceful protesters in front of the White House, and we're seeing them. For instance, we have seen a couple repeatedly abuse the media, and if the bad ones are allowed to do that, then we're going to lose this country.
I agree. I'm not disagreeing at all. I agree with everything you just said. Okay. We can't lose sight of the big picture. And that's where the focus really has got to be. I think this movement has to continue. I don't think it can stop. I don't think, because we have short attention spans. And what'll happen if things calm down and a month from now, we'll forget all about it.
They won't make legislation.
And no, in 3 months from now, or 4 months, when it's time for the election, a lot of people are going to forget, or they're going to be, their attention is going to be brought by something else, because we have a master of deflecting attention to other things.
Yes, we do.
And
I guess on that point, you could say sure, there might be some cops that would do good deeds during this time, or it's not saying that people aren't always total jerks to each other, and in all this gassing that's happening. It's not that people can be nice, it's that the system still is not changed, I guess is what I'm saying. We need a hard change revolution for it to actually, because like you just said, we could just deflect things back to oh, now there's this other distraction going on though, what happened last time, or I think even joking about it can be very very dangerous, because once you start making memes and jokes about this, once it's over, then it's perceived as it's done. But no, it's I really think that people are burning down things, they're looting, they're causing such an uproar because they've said we've tried to peacefully protest and we've tried doing the things they want to see from protesters, and nothing's changed yet. So I don't know, do you resonate with that, Eisel?
Yeah, I do. Like you said, the civil rights movement was in the 60s, and we're still out in the streets today.
Yeah,
it's
still going.
Things that haven't fixed itself. Go on.
It is still going on. We have different people, different faces, same thing.
Yeah, and it's not just that looting is just wild violence or random violence, in my opinion. And the way I see it, it's capital. They're destroying or removing capital, And that gets the attention of the capitalists, the people who have the money and the resources to actually make change.
That,
If they're able to just ignore what's going on because the looting or the rioting or the protests are in a different area of the country or a different area of the city or whatever, then that's not okay. They're the ones with the decision. So I'm not necessarily offended that the Capitol is being destroyed. It doesn't bother me.
I would say something. I want to just jump in on the looting part. I might be wrong on this. And by the way, I really dislike what I've seen on the media with the Attorney General. I think it was last evening or something. I saw a clip or something, and he's talking about they're trying to identify a white group because it's totally political on that, extremists on the left that are they're guilty ones. And I think it would be better to say that there's people who have come in to stir up things, and those are people that's bought and paid for. I mean, a lot of people aren't going to realize that or even acknowledge that. That's just a fact, okay? And maybe it's some very quiet money came in around someplace, but somebody influenced these people to go in and cause the damage, to set the fires, to break the windows in the cars, set them on flame, break the windows in the stores. And we do have a problem that's seriously, we have a white supremacist problem going, and it's serious. I think it's and growing, and we've had support of that for the last almost 4 years. That's those people show up, and there's people that want to set us against each other. It's their benefit. They're going to benefit, and we can't let that happen.
Yeah.
So this gets very complex. This is a very complex thing that's going on right now in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I think it's important to remember that we know who the protesters are. So when they're protesting, that message is its own independent message. The looting that happens afterwards, we don't know if that's linked. We don't know if they're the same people. There are reports that they're white supremacists largely, or accelerationists, or people just looking to exploit a movement. They're not inherently linked. The messages should not be conflated. And I want to address something. I'm not to say like I'm promoting looting or that the looting is a good thing. I just also can see that the looting does serve a small purpose here. I prefer it without it, but it's not something that I can just readily condemn, if that makes sense.
I understand that. I'm not disagreeing with you.
No, I get that. I just wanted to make sure I was clear in that, because
no, but
it goes back to history.
I know. The thing that bothers me though is they're just like the bad actors that come in and they're going to crash the party, and that's that goes on anytime, always. It's always gone on. It'll always go on. But there's been a lot of that, and then what that does is it takes the media, and then immediately all the focus is on that, and the message gets lost why the people are there in the first place.
Some store owners too are saying like go ahead because this isn't gonna hurt us. Like
insurance.
Yeah, some people, some of the bigger stores, they have insurance and stuff, so it doesn't. Bouncing on Izel's point, the looting itself might not be good, but the fact that it sets it promotes the motive, and it causes more uproar to see the hurt that's happening. It definitely does serve a purpose. I would agree, but it's I don't know. Any more on that piece a bit, or like I guess we didn't talk about George Floyd too much, but that is, of course, like if people are watching this video later, we're talking about the events that are happening because of George Floyd with the police brutality that we all saw. And I guess, I don't know, what would you say with technology today, Izel? This is one of the things we talk about in our videos and with John's conversations with people, that technology definitely more viral movements nowadays
Yeah.
versus before. And so kind of, I mean, I saw a lot of people saying that it was pretty much it was a public lynching pretty much on
Yeah.
web. And so I don't know, what are your thoughts with technology and this moving forward, and also maybe technology would help us with police brutality with maybe mandatory live stream webcams on them or something, or I don't know. What are your thoughts on how things are moving progressively with that?
Well, everyone having access to the internet, or not everyone, I should say, but for it to be common for people to have a camera in their pocket that they can upload live footage onto the internet from is making a huge difference here. Like, the police brutality isn't new. The new aspect is that people are able to get it on footage and spread it widely. It's like the Rodney King incident. Like, I don't think they used a flip phone back then. That footage was hard to come by. Right now, anyone could be a photographer or a cameraman. But using that moving forward, I'm not sure. I I think the part of the technology, I can't talk. My apologies. The part that's most beneficial is the added transparency here, because like we've been saying, like, people just aren't going to know this stuff by default, and so these this footage is educating people. Um, the issue with police having footage on them is that they often turn it off.
Yeah.
Um, I'm not sure. I do think, though, we need more footage about what's going on in the prison spaces, like the public prison spaces, the ones that aren't violating their privacy. We do need more access to that information to see how they're being treated. I do think that's one more area that we need to expand our technology. And not
Yeah.
necessarily to make it a surveillance state within the prisons, but more so that we know police are brutalizing people in there. And we know the inmates are brutalizing each other with little interference from the guards as well. And neither of those can be let to stand.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
Yes.
All right. Well, we're running about it's 10:50 now, pretty much. So we'll probably maybe John, do you want to tie in one last question, or Izell, did you want to say any other? This is your chance to use our platform to preach anything you want.
Only thing I would just go back to is out of all of this, I think hopefully we can find some answers and put some things in place going forward. And I also want to say that I think I'm very, very encouraged with how this has gone and the turnout and the number of voices. I think that if people keep talking and saying things and voicing their thoughts and what they're thinking and don't stop, then this is going to help something change. I think we've been too quiet for too long. And this is just time to get out and talk. And that's the only thing that's going to change it. And then the only other thing is vote, 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 vote. Voting and vote down ballot. That's how vote in your community, vote in your county, your city, vote in your state. Pay attention to things. That's one voice that I'm just going to say that is so important that a lot of people, I think, maybe are realizing now. And I realize there's challenges and all that stuff, but vote.
Yeah, I agree. And if I do get one last thing, then I would think about it for a second. But I would like to point out that if you're a capitalist, for the viewers, if you are strongly into capitalism, then you too have an incentive to want to fix the situation. Because if my understanding of capitalism is correct, then having all these individuals contributing to the system and bringing expertise to it benefits us all, because we need there to be innovators. We need there to be people who create things that benefit us all. And we have large segments of the population that aren't being equipped rightfully to be able to participate in that system due to a lack of education or resources or just preparation in general, or they're being snatched up by the police officers. And that doesn't just affect us, because of the things that we could produce, like for instance, like Alexander Graham Bell made the telephone, or Marcus Garvey and his hundreds of inventions with peanuts. There are things that we could be contributing, but we're not able to right now. That's the last message I want to say.
Cool. Well, thank you, Eisel, for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. This was great. I appreciate it very much.
Yeah,
Great
it's called American Mosaic. We'll provide you with some links in his video channel and stuff like that if you want to check it out.
Thank you. I do.
Yeah. Great conversation.